Welcome everyone to The Radical Imagination, our show that is now in its 7th month of running on MNN Network. We're on our way to a full year, 5 more months. In October, we will have a full year. Today, I'm Michael Pelias, the co-host with my friend Peter Bratsis, another co-host of the show, The Radical Imagination. And first, before we engage today's show, which will be a show about ideas and political strategy, I want first to give a shout out to the Verizon workers who are on strike, 40,000 workers in the city of New York, and the Communications Workers of America. And to make sure that we support these people, they are not paid, they make FiOS for us. They bring us shows like this in many, many ways. They do a lot of the technical work and keep the image and the word going in the city of New York. So please show solidarity. I know a lot of us are in unions where we can't do sympathy strikes, but our sympathies are with the workers of Verizon. Okay, today I'm very pleased to have as our guest Michalis Spourdalakis, a professor of political science and public administration at the University of Athens. He is also the dean of the School of Politics and Economics. And I had the pleasure of visiting his office and many offices in Athens last summer, which was quite a treat for me. Michalis is also a founding member of SYRIZA, and today's topic will be the future of SYRIZA, prospects and challenges. Question mark, right, going forward. And we're going to begin first. Hopefully, Michalis will give us a little history of the founding of SYRIZA, set it into a context, and then we will go into some harsh and very, very difficult questions.
Critical, we like to say.
Critical, we would say, yes.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
Mike, for the introduction. Good to be here. I must say at the outset that I'm a bit jealous that you're having that program. All we manage, although SYRIZA is in power, is to have a radio program equivalent of ideas. Ideas on the Air is called, with SYRIZA's radio station. This is a community station, from what I understand, and to host this kind of shows, it's very, very important. Glad to be here. Jealous and
well, we're very happy to have you here.
Right.
Hopefully, we can maybe connect with SYRIZA radio and in some way in the future. Yes.
All right. So SYRIZA's history. I mean, let's make the long story short. After the crisis of the left in the late 80s, early 90s. And all through the 90s, it seems to me, the left went through a crisis of identity, a crisis for survival, and various strategies appear on the Greek scene, on the Greek left. One was an answer strategy was the fencing in and the redefining the communist idea, and that was the strategy. It seems to me pretty sectarian, I might say so, effective on the other hand, that the Communist Party put forward. There was another strategy put forward by the modernizers who still existed within Synaspismos, the main current of SYRIZA. And they thought, okay, that's it, capitalism won, and the only thing we can do is to try to humanize it. Therefore, our strategy is to participate at all costs in the government that try to have an impact and humanizing and, you know, and capital. And the third strategy, which was chosen by SYRIZA, especially after 2004, when the various groupings, parties, movements that they put together, SYRIZA, started to engage in some kind of a left dialogue, a left platform, I believe it was called, left forum for discussing the left, was okay, let's do something else. And what let's do something else was going start with our presence, with our active presence in the social field. But in being in the social field for this lot of various people, of various political formations, was being there without any patronizing practices of the old left. Being there, learning the language of the movement, learning their practices, give as much support as they can, and assist them with anything they chose to do, even when sometimes the movement had made some controversial initiatives, and this built a trust between the peoples in the movement and generally the general public and the citizens, who were fed up with the mainstream political parties, that they was always thought that they can patronize and replicate the initiatives of the society in their effort to express themselves politically. And that was something that preceded, of course, the rise of SYRIZA, but it's in a nutshell the beginning of
the kind of
that
prefiguration of how this
exactly,
maybe
and an expression of the political crisis that existed, the crisis of representation that existed.
Could you tell us what the acronym, I know you use the Greek term synapsismos, but could you tell our viewers what SYRIZA is?
SYRIZA, synaspismos is Συνασπισμός ριζοσπαστικής αριστεράς, συνασπισμός, it's an alliance on radical left.
Right, right. Like a coalition, we call it,
right?
So
it's radical. It's a radical party. Its uniqueness, in retrospect, is that they found conditions of convivial political activity, both the entire tradition of the old left, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, Trotskyist, social democrats, radical social democrats, etc., and at the same time the new movements, the anti-globalization, or so-called anti-globalization. We're very internationalist to be anti-globalization. We know that. Globalization, the social forum people, the ecological people, the anti-racist movement, so on and so forth. So they all found some kind, an arrangement, organizational arrangement to work with and craft it, and that gave extra strength to SYRIZA at the outset.
Yeah, maybe you could also trace, and then we can go on to some more substantive stuff, but just for our viewers, once again, to talk a little bit about SYRIZA's movement into parliament elections, this kind of thing, from 2004 onward, after its...
The strategy, the beginning of that strategy started to unfold around 2004, 2005, with the previous leader from Tsipras. The other thing is that the SYRIZA's members who happened to be elected in the institution of social and political representation, unions, local government, and in the parliament, for the first time appeared to respect these democratic structures, not in any formal way, just as mainstream politicians, being very well ironed and very well calm and all that, but in a sense that they were always very much well prepared, respect the rules, be serious, be systematic, etc. But at the same time, they never lost touch from the social movements, and quite often they found themselves, these MPs or these local representatives or in union representatives, be next to the people, especially after 2010 when the resistance against austerity started, to be next to them, to support them, to encourage them, to protect them from the police if they were arrested, and so on and so forth. And that built a bone between the people. In fact, now come to think of this, this became very clear even a couple of years before that when SYRIZA decided to support the youth uprising when in December 2008 the youth high school students were mobilized extensively in every city in the country, but in particular in Athens, against protesting the killing of a 15-year-old by the police. And there I recall seeing the top leadership of SYRIZA being in the front line of the mobilizations against the tear gas and police activity and everything. And I think that was the forerunner of that trust I meant to you.
Right.
And
This could be, I mean, maybe correlated to here. That was the Greek working class lives matter moment in terms of the political, you know, or a new kind of social movement bringing in the youth, whereas we have now in the United States this Black Lives Matter, although I think it's much more prominent and much more substantial in Greece as a real political force.
Well, in December
Yes.
in Greece, they burned
Yes,
around
right.
800 buildings.
800 buildings.
In Baltimore, they
Right.
only burned about 20. So there's still many more to go until,
Right.
yeah.
until we get to that level.
But
Yes.
also it was very important because the young people attacked symbols of modern consumer society. They attacked ATMs, banks, car dealers, and big supermarkets and big department stores. So it was something.
Right.
The important thing is that at the time, SYRIZA made a statement which is very interesting, that saying that December of 2008 was the question, not the answer. Okay? So it was an expression, a vivid expression of the crisis of representation, the crisis of politics in Greece, and the crisis of democracy in this country, and that the old order of politics, parties, party system, etc., and movements and trade unions couldn't serve for the expression as of the people.
Right.
Mikhail, let me ask you a question related to the events of 2008 and what has not happened since then. Because there has been a long-standing assumption in Aristotle, Alex de Tocqueville, recently Piketty in his book on capitalism, Capital in the 21st Century, a long-standing assumption that significant economic inequalities would lead to political decay and revolutions, potentially. That you cannot have significant inequalities and at the same time maintain the semblance of a relatively open, liberal democratic regime. But with the exception of the 2008 uprisings, since then we see inequality in Greece much, much worse than it ever was, much worse than 2008. Unemployment levels 25% plus. Youth unemployment levels 60%, roughly speaking.
Yeah.
And so on down the line. A decrease in GDP, as we know, the largest ever in a peacetime decrease of GDP, worse than the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And at the same time, whereas in 2008 you did have that significant moment of resistance and uprising against the police, and not only the police, the kind of repressive components of the Greek state and the bleak prospects for the future of the students at that point. You don't have anything comparable since then. You have 24-hour general strikes, you have protests, you have expressions of popular opinion that we are against this policy or this economic situation. You have almost no examples of resistance. Attacking the system directly, making it so that the society cannot function. Greek society still is functioning with the economic problems taken into account relatively amazingly.
Yeah. Okay, first of all, I'm among these people who do not believe that economic hardships and inequality can lead to uprisings or mobilizations. Against what it is called immiseration theory, that the worse things gets, the better it is for politics. This doesn't exist. However, you're right with what you described. Yes, in 2008, well before the crisis, we had the motivation there, the reaction to this, it was, I more or less speculate, but it was an expression of what I said before, the suffocation of the society that couldn't express itself politically anymore. Especially the young people, that there was not much hope for them. We shouldn't forget that even international major institutions predict that the new generation, for the first time in capitalist history, is not going to have a better life than the previous one. So
Right.
the youth were in that. And then the Greeks protested when the memorandum was announced to 2010 in the spring. They protested. They protested to 2010 and 2011 and 2012. There were, in this period, there were about 28 general strikes, 1 or 2 days, as you said.
Yeah.
But they protested in anticipation of the measures against austerity. The austerity measures were not settled in, or a very small portion of it, okay? And they fought, and they not mobilized in any peaceful way. Every time you were, we went to a mobilization, it was like walking into a battlefield. It's just it was an amazing, it was like a war. I recall late June 2011, for 2 days in a row, Athens was like Sarajevo, you know, that kind of thing. This, of course, helped SYRIZA, to go back to our theme, helped SYRIZA to move in, because they were the only political organization that stood by them. And but you're right, since then we didn't see mobilizations of the kind we used to. One reason is you cannot have mobilizations forever, you know. There is a peak and a bust, you know, it's ups and downs in the movements. The other is indicative of the power of parliamentary elections in terms of parliamentary system, rather, as a system of inclusion within the system.
So the protesters put their faith in the parliamentary.
They put their faith and their mandate. SYRIZA all along says we are against giving us the mandate. You have to be next to it. You have to mobilize it. Okay? But it didn't work. Okay? It didn't work. They tried to mobilize it. And because their presence in the social field was not of the previous kind in terms of patronizing, they didn't know. They didn't have the know-how how to mobilize. How you're going up, you know, to organize.
How would that have worked? What kind of popular mobilization could there have been that would have given the government more power? what could people do that would result in the SYRIZA regime having more capacity to do things?
Right.
To be more creative in terms of building alternative social and economic infrastructure to support the negotiations. SYRIZA used to strategy in terms of the concrete things in 2010 and 2011, etc., was there is not such a plan B. Plan A and Plan B is the same thing, because we have to mobilize socially, politically, build co-ops, build solidarity networks, do X number of things. And this is our Plan B. So in the event that we have to make the major step with a rupture with our debtors,
Defaulting on the loans and being thrown out of the Eurozone.
Yeah, or whatever, if that was possible, then we'll have something to lean upon.
Can I just back up for a second? I think Peter kind of framed it. I'm going to reduce it to more simplistic terms when he said that the uprising in 2008, which was an expression more of an anti-capitalist moment, whereas a lot of the other expressions seemed to be against the strategies against austerity, you know, in a way, that there was this kind of strategic, maybe I'm wrong in saying this, but it seems to me
the 2008 uprisings were genuinely disruptive.
Yes.
Athens shut down. They burned down the Christmas tree. People were, you know, the mainstream was horrified that they would burn down the Christmas tree in Syntagma Square. It was of a different nature. The disruption and violence of the protests since then was on the part of the state.
Yes.
It was the largely speaking, it was the state apparatuses, the police and the security forces that were throwing the tear gas, that were causing the disturbances. And to the degree that there were real resistance, it was very limited in time. It was 24 hours, 48 hours. There would be a general strike, or there would be a protest that would in effect shut down the center of Athens.
However,
but it was predictable that it would end.
Right.
However, there were huge mobilizations in some of these strikes, and they were primarily wage earners who participate in this. Of course, the main federated and controlled by PASOK and New Democracy unions called, but that gave the excuse of people to come out and mobilize. But I don't think, Mike, that there were anti-capitalist anti-capitalist protests in any direct way. I probably implied this when I said there were the symbols of mass consumer society, capitalist society, were attacked. But there was no conscious or articulate understanding of what the youth was doing. Of course, too much to expect from kids who were 16 years old, 16, 17 years old. Okay? That was the first phase. The anti-austerity mobilizations, anti-memorandum mobilizations, they had more clearly a class and a democratic kind of essence to it, and it was more of a social nature, more of a kind of an anti-capitalist, if you like, in an indirect way. Okay. Now, mind you, there was a lot of nationalism in there, one must say. You know, those foreigners who are imposed upon us, the memorandum and austerity policies, and that gave rise, we shouldn't forget that, to a neo-Nazi group. Okay? The crisis,
ironic, since it was the Germans who actually were the...
Yeah, so there were people who started to become anti-German, and, you know, and a lot of apolitical, anti-politics kind of sentiments were expressed, right? Our plight should be attributed to the 300 MPs who are in this Yeah, you know, they're all pigs, that kind, and on that, Golden Dawn, the extreme right-wing organization, flourished. However, out of this, of the Greek crisis, political, as I said, that preceded, and economic crisis, the memorandum, austerity, etc., it was the first, and that was very significant, anti-austerity, anti-neoliberal, and democratic response to the crisis in Europe and elsewhere. That's why it inspired many people well beyond the Greece and well beyond the Balkans or Europe or you know, or the global North. So that's this is something we should keep in mind when we talk about the SYRIZA experience and see you know the similar problematics with a time lag in other societies. In Portugal, who would imagine that Corbyn will be the head of the leader of the new Labour Party, right? Right. Who would imagine that in the state will have a very serious candidate calling himself as a socialist, democratic socialist, who I heard this morning, he said, you know, he was addressing, of course, a labor movement and said, you know, labor movement has been for decades under attack by the establishment. And without a strong labor movement, we don't have a middle class. I mean, this is, I wouldn't imagine that this would ever happen. And it's happening. So, I don't know, the last 2 weeks, I think there are all-night protests of the young people downtown Paris.
Yes.
Well, there are now signs Generation Revolution, which is certainly much better than Generation Dead or Millennials. Right?
Millennium, right, exactly.
Right.
So this is interesting
On this question, Michalis, the Greek experience is, I think, a very important one for what's going on now in places like the UK and the US. Not only because of that pattern that you have this rise of people against austerity, against the deteriorating economic conditions that many people face, but in the United States, in France, in the UK and other places, when there have been significant social movements and protests, the results have been, by and large, of the last 10, 15, 20 years, inconsequential in terms of shaping policies. All of those strikes in Greece and protests leading up to 2015 elections, let's say when SYRIZA won, resulted in not even a delay of 1 day when the parliament would approve the austerity measures. Even when it was on the heels of they would have to vote for the austerity measures, it didn't even result in delaying the vote to say, let things settle down. When in the UK they had very significant protests opposing the war in Iraq, the then still not fulfilled, beginning of the war in Iraq. And I remember that
Here
year
as well, 1 million people in New York.
I was in London that year teaching there, and it was the biggest protest I ever saw. More than 1 million people, huge. And I remember I called Stanley Aronowitz and I said, I don't think, there's no way there's going to be a war. I mean, it's amazing. The popular sympathies are fundamentally against. There's no way the government could withstand such a move. And the war happened. And in Greece they passed the austerity measures. And here we have countlessly equal horrific results.
Sure.
Now, the hope for many of us was that, okay, that the states today have become increasingly immune to the pressures of popular opinions and protests. And hopefully with the SYRIZA victory of January 2015, when our forces would be also inside the state, we could have some real gains. Now, does the Greek experience in your case validate that expectation? Can we Is it reasonable to expect that if a Corbyn or a Sanders were victorious, it would result in significant gains, or does the Greek experience tell us that, well, even in that case, things are not necessarily optimistic?
Well, listen, politics, not political science.
Yes.
But politics, if one would like to simplify, are two things always. It's balance of power and timing. Timing and balance of power. It looks very simple, but it is very important. Since Machiavelli, this theoretical program, this is what modern politics is all about.
Lenin said balance of forces.
A battle of
Yes,
forces.
power
right.
in Machiavelli.
Right, in that sense, all right. So, it does validate that hope with SYRIZA, except it doesn't validate our expectations ahead of time. We should have known, and SYRIZA should have known, and SYRIZA is responsible of not predicting, of not analyzing enough, that the superior forces of the other side. And it was, you know, you couldn't beat these guys. Meanwhile, there were some advances. There was a solidarity movement built within the country that now carries out all this humanitarian action in support of the migration of the refugee crisis, okay? And there are a number of social issues that they were introduced in protecting the subaltern classes, much more than the lower middle class and people like ourselves, and that they really still see, you know, the hardships of, you know, our real income or our social income and the conditions of our social reproduction. Thousands of people get food on the table because of SYRIZA, as you know, 2.5 people that their insurance had elapsed that now have access to health care that they didn't have, you know, say, even a month ago. Things like that, and reconnection of electricity to the people that they didn't have that, and all that. Is this enough? No, it's not enough. Is this what we were expecting? Certainly not. Certainly not. Were they things that SYRIZA could have done in fields that probably are not part of the suffocating agreement that they had to sign as a result of the defeat? Probably. Okay, it should be. So you see, sometimes history proceeds and develops in a different pace that us intellectuals, and it's I can talk for myself, you know, expect. When I was 18 years old, some 40 years ago, I thought that, okay, today is Wednesday, say by Friday or maybe Monday, the revolution is going to happen. And certainly the joke was after midday, because that was when the students left their bed, you know, and they woke up.
Just around the corner.
Just around the corner. We learn that this is not it, and now this has been verified, and we learn in a hard way. But it would be a mistake, first of all, to glorify the defeat. And admittedly, some people try to glorify the defeat and say, well,
it's a victory.
It's a good thing, you know. Our memorandum and our austerity is better than the other. I don't subscribe to these things. Yes. But also, it's unfair, equally unfair, to say, well, that there's not some kind of progress and some kind of resistance to Europe. Now the balance of forces who is turning undemocratic. You have a European Union that everybody knows it does not have a democratic deficit. Simply is not democratic. Look, the reactions towards the developments in Ukraine last year, etc. Okay, so and therefore Greece, it might not be as bright beacon in the European radical and left-wing politics, but is still there. Is not now superior forces, contradictions, mistake, my switch off that beacon. But I think it is there and is making some it certainly is very important for some people in Greece. What's the alternative? There are some people who say, even people in the government, they say, well, if we can't manage to do what we wanted, violate or going back to our principles, then we should leave the government. What is the point? The point is, that's a poor excuse, mind you, or it's not a very good excuse, might not be very poor. We say, what is going to be the alternative? I much more prefer to have SYRIZA having done a major setback in its principles to manage the crisis of the humanitarian crisis or to manage the refugee crisis than the right wing or the people from the old regime.
Well, that may be true, but but the question is not only that they're better than the alternative. Do we see the possibility of that internal presence to the state being capable of resulting in a new some break with what has existed in the past? A democratization of state institutions, some substantively new direction of public policy. Because so far, and I mean, Greece is in many ways a best case and a worst case scenario. Best case because you have the conditions there for a left government to come into power, but because of the crisis, their capacity is very limited, of course. There are all kinds of problems, but do we see any indication of the possibility that parliamentary politics can, I mean, one of your advisors, right? I mean, you studied with Leo Panitch, you studied with Ralph Miliband. Ralph Miliband in parliamentary democracy, as you know, argued that
socialism. Yeah, I didn't study with him. He's the teacher of my teacher.
Yes,
so
I'm saying by extension, as you know, his argument was that socialism is not possible through parliamentary means, at least in Britain with the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And I think also when you speak to we manage the humanitarian crisis better, I mean, what comes across, at least to some people on the left, is that now SYRIZA is in a position they're going to save capitalism from itself. And is this the goal, you know, ultimately of these kind of radical movements? What is radical about that? I know it's optimistic. No, I know it is. Yeah. But it's certainly one thing out there.
I don't think this is possible to save capitalism from itself because the structural problems with capitalism go deeper. If that was the case, social democracy would have been an alternative to today's crisis. And SYRIZA explicitly has denied that, and I agree with that position. Theoretically, there's not a point to discuss to develop that now. Yes, under one condition. Yes, in other words, that SYRIZA can make a difference even under parliamentary democracy. If it becomes SYRIZA again. If it manages to, in the new conditions, reorganize the party, if it manages to mobilize the entire left as he used to do, if he manages to have a program and a strategy that will rely to the movements and the spontaneity of the movements, and if he manages to break with the stupidity of the media and the mainstream politicians that they never understood, how come and SYRIZA calls for mobilizations against the SYRIZA's government now? Yes. It has happened many times. Yes. That SYRIZA as a party called for strikes and support of strikes and support of all sorts of mobilizations in the last year of 15, 16 months.
The Minister of Labor called for a general strike against the policies they were to implement.
That
yes.
too. This is not as some people think, a trick or contradiction or anything, because political parties, as all of us here know, it's this unique institution that it's 2 feet. One is in power, or would like to be in power, and the other is in the society. And this do not coincide all the time. So the problem with parliamentarism, social democracy, especially the old one, because they knew it's completely hegemonized by neoliberalism, is not the point talking about it. But the old social democracy is that they contain its initiatives to the parliamentary core and functions, etc. So if SYRIZA becomes SYRIZA again, okay, then there is hope that it will make a difference. Now, this kind of discussion we have brings up the classical dilemma of the left: reform or revolution. To me, this is not a question. This is not a dilemma in our modern times. It's both revolt and revolution at the same time. Revolution and reform, not revolt.
Right.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's a good unconscious desire. We can hear it.
It's reform. Let me say that: reform or revolution, revolution or reform. But also, given we live in a hurricane of austerity, and it's not a buzzword, austerity, and neoliberalism is not a buzzword, but permeates every bloody bone of the society, culturally, socially, economically, symbolically, everything, right? The organization of the state, everything.
Right.
The third dimension to this dilemma, if you like, that continuum, it's containment. Containment and resistance, if you like, against this this hurricane, this undermining of social cohesion as we knew it in the past. So I don't think the left should, first of all, of course, ignore the old dilemmas, but they should give new answers in new conditions. Reform or revolution. Yes, containment as well, that will bridge the two together. Is SYRIZA capable of doing that? It was much more clear that he was on this track before he came to terms with the reality of managing state power. But isn't that the problem with when you do that? I mean, okay, you're a philosopher, you're a prominent sociologist. That was always the case. If you ask me in a year's time or 2 years' time, I will start up with this kind of the vein of this framework of mind,
yes.
And I will probably give a little more definite answers to that. Maybe more pessimistic and more optimistic. But certainly will always have to be critical. Just I was very critical last year before me and many other people, not just me, but just about everybody that I knew in Greece, in or outside the party. Everybody wanted in January 25th, 2015, the evening to celebrate SYRIZA's victory. And they said we want to celebrate, you know, and make ourselves silly because the next day is going to be hell. And it has been hell. Okay? These difficulties were exaggerated because of some naive choices that they were interfere in SYRIZA's tactic, strategy, and all that kind of stuff. One of them being the way they treated state power. Your question, you get into state power and into managing this, and you go in without having in mind, but that these functions and structures and habits, they can suck you in and, you know, kill you and kill your radicalism or ideas in, you know.
So, I mean, to speak, since we probably have about 10, 12 more minutes, to the future, you made the statement that one thing you would like to see, or you think a working principle would be, is for SYRIZA to become SYRIZA again. Can you, explain that? I know you wrote an article. I read the article in Jacobin, a couple of months ago, in which you call for this in a certain way. But again, for our viewers to maybe discuss what you mean by that, becoming SYRIZA again.
First of all, SYRIZA has to deal, under the new circumstances, has to deal with the fact that another issue is facing is the hollowing out of the party. A lot of cadre left and moved into the parliament,
right,
and to the state and to the government. Some people got disappointed.
Right.
And they're involved in sub-politics, if you don't mind me calling them that, and which are very important. They do solidarity work, they deal with local issues, etc. And some people left, exit, or got tired, or
well, we certainly remember the schism last summer that happened with the left platform.
So SYRIZA has to put its act together and build a party. We're expecting to have pretty soon a conference. It was scheduled to take place at the end of May. I doubt it if there is enough time to have a preparation for that, but eventually it will happen. And try through the party to rebuild some kind of a distance between and redevelop its critical practice and initiatives. The backbone of the party, the essence of the party, the culture of the party remains very radical. It remains in the majority, seems to me, that the movements are very important. This is where the things come from, and that participation and democracy.
Right.
So a lot has been left to that development. At the same time, should be open to the people that they are outside the party or left the party, and they should try to confront in a sober way the uncritical and very polemic criticism that is faced to, being called names and all that kind of stuff. Okay, some people got disappointed, left the party, but they shouldn't boo on the streets SYRIZA's members that just a month ago or 2 months ago they were facing with they were hand in hand facing the police tear gas. This is unfair, and they should, as a government and as a party, should use its imagination and take initiatives in the cracks allowed by this memorandum and these austerity measures that they have to do. They should, SYRIZA should take the initiative to do things and being able to advertise that, let the people know that will make the difference. There is one thing about this memorandum that labor relations is not on it. So there is something. If SYRIZA fails, okay, having said all this, if SYRIZA fails to put its own statement and perspective and optimism and vision in the cracks allowed by this coup which was imposed on the country, then I'm afraid that we're going to see a non-democratic developments in Greece.
In Greece.
And this is what.
Why do you say that?
Because so far austerity was answered by democratic, left-wing, radical left, but democratic. There were some minor answers by the extreme right, nationalism, protectionism, racism, what have you. What if the disappointment and the humiliation of SYRIZA is of the kind that the people find no hope anywhere else? Because the old regime, New Democracy, PASOK, the River is just kind of a postmodern, whatever, neoliberal stuff. There's no hope. The Communist Party is very conservative and is very nationalist. It's in this idea that they don't understand politics, they don't understand radical politics as shifting the balance of forces towards the subaltern classes. They think all or nothing. Okay, let's. It's like storming the Winter Palace. This is not on the agenda anymore, not just in the core of capitalism and member of the European Union, but anywhere else.
To go back to this SYRIZA becoming SYRIZA again, what would be a working principle for you in this context? What would SYRIZA have to do? And we have about a minute and a half, and we'll kind of close it on that.
A constitution that will be able to maintain the strategy I explained, a constitution that will promote, will have an open party that will promote participation, and democratic principles will be actively protected. We didn't have. Since the split last summer, we had some progress, but before that it was not very much affected that way. And while they were doing this, I think SYRIZA will have to open a dialogue with those radical activists that they've been disappointed and left the party.
This includes people in the left platform who have gone and...
Some of them, yes, but left platform now with a minute and a half or 30 seconds,
last 30 seconds.
it's very conservative. They don't believe in the movement so much. they're in the mentality of very
The second international.
third international,
maybe.
that kind of thing that you know, movements don't make a difference. They disguise the hardships of capitalism and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And they not you know, philanthropy. They mixed up solidarity with philanthropy. They are in the old mode of this. On the other hand, they're very dedicated militants,
Right,
and
right.
there's a great respect for that.
I want to thank you very, very much for being here. This was very informed and very articulate, and I think our viewers will really enjoy this this show.
I
and
hope
we will
so.
send it to
Thank
Greece
you.
too.
Thank you
so
very
much
much.
for
I
being
benefited
here.
a lot.
And thank you, Peter, for all
thank you,
your
Peter. Thank you, Mike.
interventions.
Okay, good to be here.
Thank you again. I'm Michael Pelias. We're signing off from our show, The Radical Imagination. Thank you for joining us, and please, if you have extra money, you can send it to the Ministry of Interior in Greece. They'll put it to good work in their solidarity
university.
campaigns, or to the university. Right. Thank you very, very much, and yes.